I'm glad we're finally able to talk again. I really enjoyed our first conversation.
Yes, I know. Whenever I see like your name pop up on somebody else's podcast, I was like, "Oh, I saw you had Diane on your podcast. I love her. She's like longtime podcasting friend."
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I know we've known each other for a couple of years now. I feel like I'm always redundant when I go on people's podcasts. I guess you do have your like main topics that you always speak
Mhm.
to.
Yeah. And then people ask you the same things too because like that's what you get known for. So, it's easy. I don't have to like prepare anymore. Like I just kind of go in and I'm like, "Okay, I know where this is going." I just have my coffee and go in.
Absolutely. Well, I feel like you are doing the rounds right now because you have a new book that is coming out and it's called Buy What You Love Without Going Broke, which I think is something that all of us want to do. I myself am, I always say I'm somewhat bougie. I do like my things. I just prefer to have higher quality things. And then I live by a certain set of rules to stay minimalist. So I can't wait to dive into your book. Quickly again, though, Jen, why don't you just go ahead and reintroduce yourself to the listeners and we'll get into our conversation?
Yeah. So thank you so much for having me. My name is Jen Smith, and I'm the co-host of Frugal Friends podcast with my really good friend Jill. And we started the show six and a half years ago, I guess, at this point, to help people save money if paying off debt was their goal or whatever their financial goals were. And over the 6 years, we realized that maybe saving money isn't the right way to look at it because everybody wants to save money. Everybody wants to have more money in their bank account. That's not the issue. The issue is how do we figure out what to spend on? Because you can't just spend on nothing. We have to learn how to spend money. And so for the past few years, we've been talking about values based spending and positioning it as a skill that anybody can learn, anybody can get better at. And that's how you figure out what you spend money on. And more importantly, what you don't spend money on.
Absolutely. I will just say here from the get go, I mean, as a fellow, like between podcaster to podcaster, I think I've always struggled with that because the way that I monetize this podcast is through advertisements for things for people to buy. And I'll just be transparent here. I don't really know how else to make money on something that I am contributing my time to and hopefully is a valuable resource without doing that. You can go other routes like Patreon and other things, but I think this is the easiest opt-in. But I've always just said like, look, we live in a world where you do buy things. And maybe not all of these things you want to buy, but if there's interest here, here's the thing that I believe in and I would put out there. So just all that to say, I think we do, even when we're trying to be intentional about spending and or live a minimalist lifestyle, we can't disregard that we live in the world where we spend.
Yeah. I mean, and we have advertising on our show as well. And we occasionally, we will regularly thank our listeners for listening to these ads so that they can get the show for free. Because again, yeah, we want to give our listeners as much of this content for free as possible. We'll still be able to, put food on our kids' table. And so yeah, it's not the advertising and the marketing that's evil. It's we have to know ourselves and know what's the right thing to buy in the right season and know what's not, what maybe we need to wait a season for. And so yeah, it's really learning more about ourselves
Mhm.
versus learning about how to get the best deal on something.
Absolutely. So the subtitle of your book is Transform Your Spending and Get More of What Money Can't Buy. Before we got on the call, you were talking about how our dopamine receptors can cause us to be more impulsive. But when we're impulsive, we might not be doing what your subtitle suggests we should do to transform the way that we're spending. So tell me a little bit more about what you've learned through your research about the dopamine receptors and why that might not be the best way to make a purchase is when those are lighting up.
So dopamine is an essential like neurotransmitter in our brain. We love it. We love dopamine, but we want to be activating it in the right areas. And so it's so easy to get those dopamine hits from the things that are right in front of us, the things that we're seeing on our screens, on our billboards. And so more often than not, those are things that cost money. So whether it's not just things too, right? It's not just food and home goods and stuff. It's also travel. And it's also like activities for our kids. It's all kinds of things that cost money. So we're looking at these things and we know enough about dopamine to know, like, yes, when I buy something, I get that dopamine hit, but it's fleeting. It goes away. So why do I keep buying it? Well, we studied Dr. Ann Lemke's research from her book, Dopamine Nation. And she found after she worked with all kinds of people with all kinds of addiction, from the very common to the very neutral to even the not suitable for work sort of addiction. So she's worked with a lot of different patients, different clients, and found that it's not so much the reward. So if you're familiar with the habit loop, like cue, response, reward, that's not where most of the dopamine gets released. Most of our dopamine gets released in anticipation of that reward. And so that's not directly her research, but it's in the book. But so there was like 10 times the amount of dopamine released in anticipation. And if you've ever taken a vacation, you know, it's that week leading up to the vacation that's
Mm.
usually like you're more excited about it than when you're on the actual vacation. It's that anticipation that really gets us. And that is how we end up mindlessly scrolling on the apps. That's how we end up in the store. So that's how we put ourselves in those positions to end up, quote unquote, accidentally or impulse buying something. And so the question then becomes, how do we take ourselves out of that place? How do we build anticipation for other things that
Mhm.
maybe don't cost money or cost less money? You don't have to skip right from like I'm spending a lot to I'm spending very little or nothing on something, you know, you love. There is always a middle ground. So that's the journey that we want to take people on, that we have been taking people on.
How would you suggest abstaining from these discretionary items for a month? How would that help maybe reset our dopamine receptors? Do you think that's a worthwhile endeavor?
Yes. So our brains can be retrained, right? So not like full 180, but for the entire time you're alive, your brain can be shaped, refined, molded the way you think. So, yes, dopamine is definitely something that can be reshaped. So, what I found, and this is before I ever studied dopamine, this is before I ever even wrote personal finance articles on the internet. I was in a season of my life where my husband and I were paying off $78,000 of debt. And we thought it was going to take us 5 years. It ended up taking us 2 years. And part of the reason was, yes, we increased our income, but we also decreased our spending. And the way that I was able to decrease my spending was by doing these no spend challenges. And so for a month, I would stop spending money just on anything discretionary. I would still pay my bills, like put gas in my car, buy groceries, like all that. But anything not necessary was off the table. And so I found I would only do that for a month. Like you can find books, you can find a lot of people who do it for a year plus, but I was just doing it for a month. And I found when I started, I did it so that I could save a couple $100 extra to put towards debt. What I found was that the no spend challenge really taught me about what I valued. It showed me what I missed most, which were things that I did not expect, things that maybe I felt a little guilty about, if we're honest, a little shameful. We can talk about that later. And it showed me the things that I didn't think twice about, things that I thought were very important to me that I did not miss at all. And then it started to show me the things that I was spending money on that I could be getting in a way that did not cost me money or cost me a lot less. And so, what I did to save money, and it's the same way we start the podcast to help people save money, what I learned was that I really needed to be identifying like what I want to spend money on and what I don't. And so, when we read Dopamine Nation, her thing is dopamine fasting. So, like, you can't actually fast from dopamine. You will always have dopamine in your brain. You don't want to fast from it, but she called it that. And so for 4 weeks, she would have her clients fast from whatever their addiction was, if as long as it was like medically okay. So not if it was like narcotics or anything, but if it was medically okay. And what she found was that after 4 weeks, the brain started to reprogram and desire that addiction less. And so part of it was habitual. The first 2 weeks were very habitual, but
Mhm.
after 4 weeks, it started to become physical as well.
Mhm.
So we've kind of like taken that on. She didn't talk about spending money at all or shopping at all in the book, but we really have translated that into the way that we recommend no spend challenges to kind of reset if you're somebody who shops and really gets that, really feels good, maybe shops for escape or
Mhm.
shops out of boredom or for any reason, it can really help you to habitually and physically kind of reroute yourself.
Mhm. Absolutely. I will admit it here. I had a moment last month. It was my birthday, and I saw a sale on Abercrombie, and I was like, I'm just going to get a few things. And I didn't wait, and it was somewhat frivolous. I ended up sending a few of the things back that I got. But usually I'm pretty good about that, waiting, like giving myself a waiting period. But I will say what has been helpful in the past when I haven't indulged myself. And this specific example was I was on Lucky Brand. I saw this t-shirt and I was like, oh, I really want that t-shirt. I can't wait to get it. I want it. And then I visualized myself wearing the t-shirt. And then once I put it back in my closet, it was no longer new. If we can really get the foresight to walk ourselves through that process, I think it would also be helpful, like bringing it to the prefrontal cortex and or just not being as impulsive. Because like you said, we might be tired. We might be trying to fill a void that is emotional and not just something that we actually need. But that was so incredibly helpful because I'm like, I already have a Lucky Brand t-shirt. And why do I not get as excited? It kind of looks the same. I already have something like that. This is only going to be new for a day. And then it's my t-shirt in my closet. So,
hmm That sounds similar to something Jill says on the show.
okay.
When you're in Target and you see this like beautiful home decor, like that's all set up in the was it the Joanna Gaines section or the Studio McGee section? It's a beautiful part of Target. Take it out of its beautiful curated gallery and put it in the trash can section. Like put it next to the trash cans and see if it still gives you the same like dopamine rush, that same gooey feeling. And if it does, like then maybe it's meant for your house. If
Yeah.
not, it's not. So just envisioning it, not to say like, our houses are trash cans, but I mean, maybe depending on how you feel about your house right now in this given moment, maybe it is. And you still got to feel good about it in a
Yeah.
trash can home.
Well, you know what's interesting about doing that, kind of taking it out of where it's aesthetically pleasing? It's because everything in that section is aesthetically pleasing. So it's like, oh yeah,
hmm
this little trinket looks great with this pillow and this fake plant and this bench. All of it together, I think, is stimulation overload or like, I don't really know. Like it's visually pleasing to us. But when you remove it and it's just this one thing that I'm purchasing, it's like, oh, I probably don't need that because it's not going to look that way in my house. So I love that. I feel like I've seen a reel about that on Instagram that made me
I
laugh.
think that's where she got it.
I love
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more just to kind of wrap up the dopamine part of this. I guess just more of those before and afters. What does it look like for someone to be in that habit? I guess like realistically, like do you have an example from your book that you could draw on that before and after? Like how will we be afterwards? And maybe it's just that waiting period that we start to apply.
Yeah. So it's not going to be like a total transformation. It's not life changing, but it is season changing, I think. So for me, at least, I don't do them often. It's not something you have to do often. I did a few while we were paying off debt, and I've done a few since then just to kind of like a reset. So my most recent one was January of this year. And at this point I have hosted a podcast on frugality and saving money and stuff for 5.5 years. I've written a book on no spend challenges. Okay. So and I did a no spend challenge in January of this year and I spent money while doing my no spend challenge, right? I didn't do it perfectly. And here's another thing. So I put it on social media every day for 30 days. I posted a video and I had someone like invite me to lunch and I was going to go with them because I didn't want to like impose my challenge on them. But then she saw that we had a challenge going on and she suggested doing something else. So, like, it was my friends helping me stick to this challenge,
Mhm.
sometimes even more than me. Right. And so I always say, it doesn't matter if you quote unquote mess up. If
Mhm.
you did a no spend challenge perfectly, you would not need the no spend challenge. It
Mhm.
wouldn't be a challenge. It would just be you being a person who likes to not spend money. And that's no challenge. So go into it with the mindset that, okay, I don't have to do this perfectly to get through all 30 days. But if you have a day where you spend on something unplanned, then that's something that we journal about, we meditate on, whatever, however you like to process things. We talk about that with ourselves to figure out, okay, why did I spend on it? So is there a way that I could have planned or prepped in order to not have to spend on this? Am I saying it's a need when it's really just a want? Because all the time when we buy something, we say, I need. Even recently, right now, I am waiting on buying a new laptop backpack because mine, I've had it for 6 years and all the fake leather is like peeling off and it's just like not aesthetically pleasing anymore. Does it hold my laptop? Yes. So do I need a new laptop backpack? No. But do I want one? Yeah, and that's fine. But so it's starting to ask yourself these questions and be honest with yourself. And we are so judgmental of ourselves. And it's just trying to stop that. Like, stop being judgmental of yourself, the things you value and the things you want. And
Mhm.
just know, I want these things. That's
Mhm.
okay. I just have to make sure I have the money to afford them. So,
Mhm.
and that I can say no to the things that I may be socially pressured to want. And you will find all these things during
Yeah.
the no spend challenge. And then afterwards, maybe choosing one or two to continue to work on yourself with. You'll find out a lot of things, but you don't have to work on them all at once. But you can go into your season knowing what maybe is the next thing I want to work on to improve my spending.
So, anyways, I want to talk about we find ourselves in the habit of stress shopping. And again, we have the dopamine that is, we know what physically is going on now. We know what is going on in our mind. But what is a way? I guess I just feel like there are people listening and they're like, wait, how am I possibly going to stop myself in the moment? Yes, it's great to bring it back to the prefrontal cortex, but that's going to take me some work. So, what are maybe some other strategies we could put into place to stop the stress shopping, maybe even before it begins?
Yeah. So with stress, we know that there's a heightened cortisol, when stress happens. And we have to release that in some way. And so we will go through our mental inventory of coping mechanisms. And we don't realize we have a mental inventory of coping mechanisms. We just kind of automatically like revert to some. And for a lot of people, that is scrolling social media or maybe like going to Target and getting a coffee and walking around the pretty curated home decor section. So it can be, what have you. But what they are these coping mechanisms to release some cortisol. So instead of just letting your coping mechanisms happen to you, happen to your coping mechanisms. So decide on some, and this will be some work because somebody else's, strategy isn't necessarily going to work for you. You're going to have to find your own. But finding your own things that help you release cortisol in a healthy way. The two most popular, and if you're going to start somewhere, these are the two places we recommend, are meditation and exercise. So those are study after study after study, kind of some of the best ways to release that cortisol out of your body and to feel better, to get that rush of endorphins. And when you have endorphins, you're happy, and happy people don't stress shop. So that is the kind of the first place. And within that, there's like a spectrum meditation, all kinds of types of meditation, all kinds of types of exercise. We're looking in here specifically for some stress reduction. So we're not like health and fitness influencers, like telling you what types of exercise and meditation you should be doing, but getting on that journey to find out what works for you. that's a great starting point. And then moving on from there. So maybe walks in nature or a walk around your block or which is still considered exercise too. So, but just like finding your things so that you can create your mental list of coping mechanisms that you revert to instead of just going to the traditional places that will inevitably elicit some kind of impulse buy.
Mhm. I think too, we discredit how tired we might be, and it actually might be sleep that we need. I think a
Mhm.
lot of my impulsivity happens when I'm really tired and I'm scrolling at night and then I'm influenced by something and I put it on my wish list, which something that's helpful if you are trying to be more mindful. I have a wish list and in the notes app on my phone, I'll screenshot it and then I put it in there. And then it's funny because this is kind of just putting that pause on it. I just had a birthday and a few people were asking me what I wanted. And so I was like, oh, let me go see what do I want? It's on this list.
Mhm.
I truly had a hard time pulling things off this list. It's like, oh, I thought that I wanted this. I thought that I needed this at one point, and now I'm struggling to even find what I actually feel like I really want and need. So I think meditation, exercise, good for later in the day. But if we find ourselves at like 10:30 at night, not necessarily able to get up, just give yourself this little like limbo of sorts for the item to go before you actually pull the trigger and go to sleep.
Yes. And we love a wish list. Some people will say put it into your cart and wait with it in your cart, but now these e-commerce sites are getting so savvy. They'll send you emails like cart abandonment emails. So we love a wish list or notes app, Notion, what have you. And yeah, it's always so interesting when you come back to see like what you wouldn't buy now and how much money you have saved just because you gave yourself some space.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, just a few more things before we wrap up. Your book is obviously talking about the things that we truly value. How do we narrow that down? What do I truly value? How do I figure that out?
Yeah. So when we started thinking about values-based spending, we actually started with like these core values or corporate values or like that's what is all over the internet, right? So we're like, okay, this must be what people value if the internet's saying that's what people value. And we just had a hard time getting people like when we would ask our listeners, what are the things that you value most highly? They would all say the same three-ish things. And we had to stop be like, "Okay, stop, like, with these things. Pick some other values. You can't all love the same thing." Until we realized after after doing our research that most people do value the same things. And the way we show up in those things is unique. And so when we're talking about values, we have found that the 4 Fs are really the the 4 values that most people will rate most highly. If you had to give them what are your top 5 values, at least 3 out of 4 are gonna be on the list, and it's family, friends, faith, fulfilling work. And so more often than that, those are what we see people valuing, and it's so values-based spending really helps you figure out where you're going to show up for these. Is it more time with your family? Is it career flexibility so you can pick your kids up from school? Are you younger and you don't have like a big family? So maybe friends are at the top of that list for you. Maybe you want to be able to take spiritual retreats or give more generously or, do work that may not make the most but really makes you come alive. So it's figuring out where you want to show up in these higher values, and that determines how you save money for the future and also how you spend money. So, like, I love coffee. I love going to a coffee shop and getting a latte. But because I knew I valued that, I used it as an excuse to just buy coffee whenever, which is not going to break the bank, but it does add up. And so I realized the most enjoyment I get out of going to a coffee shop is when I'm going to one with a friend. And
Mm,
so,
mhm.
yes, I can have a friend over to my house, but I also have the freedom to go get a coffee with a friend or a cocktail at a happy hour.
Yeah.
So, I would continue to get coffees out if they brought me to my higher value of friendship. So
Mhm.
if it was values aligned, I would do it. But if it was just a mindless, drive through Starbucks double star day sort of thing, like
Yeah.
that I've stopped myself from doing. So it can be the same thing, the same type of purchase, but made for different reasons. One can be right for you and one can be wrong for you in the season.
Hmm.
So that's and we also look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Hmm.
On the bottom is all the physical needs, right? And those are the things people, especially in the personal finance space, will say like only spend your money on the physical needs and the
Yeah.
safety needs, your house, your food, all that. That's the only thing that's important. If you're, trying to save money or get out of debt, they don't look at the higher needs, which is self-esteem,
Mm.
self-actualization, all the self stuff. And we found that if you don't pay attention to those things, you will still spend in order to achieve some false sense of what they are, or
Mm.
to get them in some other place. If I don't love myself, I'll keep buying clothes to maybe I'll love myself when I look this way or
Mhm.
this way.
Mhm.
If you don't look at what's truly going on with those higher needs, it doesn't save you money. You just spend it in different ways, and it makes it harder to spend in alignment with your values.
Mhm.
So we want to look at those things too. We want to look at our whole personhood and really find out who we are so that we can, choose those higher needs when it comes down to it in the moment.
Yes, and I think being strategic about so like you said, you were strategic in saying, "I enjoy going to get coffee with a friend, so I might not just be into the." I think it's almost like a muscle memory, us going through that drive-through. I used to do that all the time when
Mhm.
especially when I had a newborn, it kind of broke up my morning, and so it was just
Yep.
something I enjoyed doing, or we would walk up to the coffee house, which again, that was enjoyable because I was getting exercise, my baby was getting her morning nap, and I was getting coffee. So to me, that was a
Mhm.
work. But it does become like this just thing that we do and we don't fully think it through. So I enjoy cocktails with my friends. However, during the summer, it's like, okay, let's go out on our back patio and we're going to save a ton of money because it's much cheaper to buy a bottle of gin than to buy one gin cocktail at the bar. And so just saving money when it's nicer out here in Ohio, that's something that we strategically do. I know it's a crazy example, but it's living an intentional life. It's living with intention.
Yes.
I'm not gonna totally say no to this, but this is what makes this is the better choice here if I'm gonna still do this. Because my relationships are truly everything to me. So I think that's where most of my values lie. I'm happy to go spend money with my friends and spend money on versus getting a new dress that again is not gonna be new for more than a day or a week.
Yeah, when your values are the North Star, you start thinking, how can I get more of the things I value most? Not just, okay, how can I like cut my spending? Like
Mm.
how can I be okay with cutting out happy hour on Friday? And how can I be okay with cutting out my morning latte? Like when we start focusing on the values, then then that's it changes the conversation. It's like, how
Mhm.
can I get more time with friends? I can invite them over to my house for cocktails or wine night or
Yeah.
potluck. And we forget about the deprivation, not 100% because there is sacrifice, but we it changes from a conversation of deprivation to truly like a values aligned life.
Mhm.
And yes, there's still sacrifice. Anytime you're changing direction, there's friction. But the
Mhm.
friction is good. Lean into the friction because you're going you're going the right way. You're going to get more time with friends, more time with family. Like this is the direction we want to be going.
Mhm. Absolutely. That's so good. Well, Jen, you have given me a lot to think about today, but where can listeners find more from you and your podcast and grab a copy of this book when it's available?
Yeah, so pre-orders are available now for Buy What You Love Without Going Broke, and that's at buywhatyoulovebook.com. And pre-orders are so important because it helps not just our voices, but other voices that are saying the same things about like less consumption get their voices heard too. So money talks to publishers, and we want as many people talking about subjects like this as possible. So pre-orders are super important. So buywhatyoulovebook.com, and then Frugal Friends podcast in the meantime, anywhere you're listening to this podcast every Tuesday and Friday.
Perfect. Well, as we wrap things up here, I'm going to ask you two just quick rapid fire questions just to get to know you a little bit better. And the first one is what's been a beneficial resource in your life that you want to share with the listeners?
So I'm going to say this with so much humility. My minivan has been a really valuable resource. I was a millennial who was like, I'm never getting a minivan. And I have been humbled in the last year as my 5-year-old this morning was trying to escape out of the car while it was moving because he didn't want to go to school. And he couldn't because I locked those doors because that's a feature of the minivan and so much storage. So yeah, I am a humbled minivan millennial.
That's great. I'm not quite there. I drive a Highlander. It's kind of right in the middle of a minivan and an SUV.
You're
So
still a cool millennial. You're still cool.
I do
Um,
wish I had more. The minivan, I'm jealous of my friends that have vans and all the space for sure.
you give up some of your street cred, but you gain so much towing space.
Yeah, yeah. It's all that sacrifice we were talking about earlier. Well, my last question for you is what is something that you can't stop talking about?
Okay, so I haven't stopped talking about the book just because we've been doing so many interviews, but
What?
something else I can't stop talking about. We just recently got these mugs for our podcast, and we are not merch people. We don't do merch like regular podcasts, but I think you'll appreciate this, Diane. Our mug says frugal
Oh,
AF.
I
It's got
love
all
that.
my coffees. Yeah, I love this mug. It's like the perfect, like just size for holding.
Yeah,
And yeah, I can't stop talking about the mug. And people are, I don't think they're annoyed, but
yeah,
I always show them pictures of the mug like it's my child because I designed the graphic for it. Maybe that's why I love it too. Like I
yeah.
designed that,
Love
and I'm not
that.
a graphic designer. So
I want
yeah.
you to make me one that says minimalist AF, but again, I don't know if that's kind of ironic, like buying another mug that I don't necessarily need, but I just kind of like it. So maybe I'll
See,
get rid
that's why we don't do merch
Yeah.
because we don't want people to like buy it. But we give these out. These are actually for our referral program for our newsletter. So
Okay.
if you're on the friend letter, frugalfriendspodcast.com, and you refer 10 people, 10 friends, then you earn a mug. So we felt that was a good, like, you don't have to pay money for it. You can't
Yeah.
buy this mug.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
I still want you to design one for me that says minimalist AF. I'll get rid of 2 mugs.
there you go.
And then that way I feel like I'm doing a little bit more to have my cute mug. But
Yes.
well, Jen, thanks for joining me today. I hope this was helpful to people. And I'll be sure to link our last conversation as well in the show notes so people can go back because I know that I don't even remember what we talked about, but I know that I love talking to you. And that's why I had you back again today. So thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Diane. This was great.